One Saturday afternoon in Seattle, Washington, 28-year-old Daniel Brooks sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the floor. Outside, the city buzzed with weekend life. Children laughing in parks, couples walking by Pike Place Market, ferries crossing the Puget Sound. But inside Daniel's small apartment, the air felt heavy, as if the walls themselves pressed against him. He had woken up hours ago, but hadn't moved much since. The blinds were drawn, dishes piled in the sink, and his phone blinked with unread messages he couldn't bring himself to answer. He told himself he'd shower soon, maybe go grocery shopping, maybe even call his mother. But the weight in his chest made even those simple tasks feel impossible. It hadn't always been like this. Daniel once loved weekends, playing guitar with friends, hiking trails near Mount Rainier, or catching a Mariners game. But lately, joy slipped through his fingers like water. Every day felt the same. Wake up exhausted, drag himself through work, and come home to silence. His depression had crept in quietly, almost unnoticeable at first. It started with restless nights, then grew into skipped meals and canceled plans. By the time he realized how much it had consumed him, he was already deep in the shadows. "Maybe I'm just weak," he whispered to himself, a thought that cut deeper than any wound. That Saturday, as he sat motionless, his phone buzzed again. It was a message from his friend Maya Johnson. "Hey Danny, haven't heard from you in a while. Want to grab coffee?" He stared at the screen, torn between wanting to see her and the crushing voice inside saying, "You'll just ruin her day." His finger hovered over the reply button. In the end, he put the phone down and lay back on the bed. The buzzing stopped, but the silence felt even heavier. His mother, Caroline Brooks, had called the night before, asking if he was eating well. He had lied and said, "Yeah, Mom, I'm fine. Just busy with work." But the truth was that some nights he forgot to eat at all. At work, things weren't much better. His company had announced layoffs, and though Daniel kept his job, the pressure doubled. He worked late into the night, staring at lines of code while his thoughts whispered, "You're not good enough. You'll fail eventually." Even when projects succeeded, he couldn't feel proud. His inner critic drowned out any sense of achievement. One evening, after another 12-hour shift, Daniel walked home through Pioneer Square. The city lights blurred as tears welled in his eyes. He ducked into an alley, leaned against a brick wall, and let himself cry quietly. A man walked past, gave him a curious glance, and kept moving. That moment made Daniel feel invisible, like his pain didn't matter in a city full of rushing people. The turning point came when Daniel overslept and missed an important team presentation. His boss, frustrated, called him into the office. "Daniel, you're talented, but your performance has slipped. Is everything okay?" Daniel wanted to explain, but the words stuck. He muttered an apology and left, his shame heavy. That night, he wondered if the world would be better off without him. But then, something unexpected happened. Maya, who hadn't heard from him in months, showed up at his apartment. She knocked and called his name until he opened the door, disheveled and hollow-eyed. "Danny, what's going on?" she asked softly. He tried to brush her off, but Maya wouldn't leave. She sat with him for hours, listening as he haltingly admitted how dark things had become. Maya's eyes filled with tears, but she stayed calm. "You don't have to go through this alone," she told him. "There are people who can help, therapists, support groups. Even your doctor can point you in the right direction." For the first time in a long while, Daniel felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, things didn't have to stay this way. One Saturday, as the appointment date drew closer, Daniel felt his chest tighten with both hope and dread. The thought of sitting across from a stranger and sharing his darkest secrets terrified him. But as he sat in his apartment, staring at the quiet rain outside, he told himself softly, "I need to try. I can't keep living like this." The waiting room smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. Posters on the wall read, "You are not alone. Help is here." Daniel sat in a chair, knees bouncing, until a woman with kind eyes appeared. "Daniel," she asked. He nodded, and she introduced herself as Dr. Laura Martinez, a licensed therapist. Inside her office, Daniel stared at the carpet, unsure how to begin. Dr. Martinez spoke gently. "You don't have to have the perfect words. Just tell me what life has been like lately." Slowly, the floodgates opened. Daniel spoke of sleepless nights, crushing guilt, and the weight of pretending he was fine. Dr. Martinez listened without judgment. "What you're describing sounds like depression," she explained. "It's an illness, not a weakness. The fact that you're here means you're stronger than you realize." For the first time in months, Daniel felt seen. Over the next few weeks, Daniel attended therapy every Wednesday. Some sessions left him drained, others gave him clarity. He learned about negative thought patterns and how they shaped his feelings. Dr. Martinez taught him grounding exercises for anxiety and encouraged him to start journaling. At first, journaling felt strange. But soon, Daniel began to write down the voices in his head, the ones saying he wasn't enough, and then challenge them. On paper, he could see how unfair and harsh his inner critic had been. Still, progress wasn't linear. Some days he couldn't get out of bed. Other days, panic attacks hit him out of nowhere. He once canceled a therapy session because he felt too ashamed. But Dr. Martinez called to remind him healing takes time. Missing a step doesn't erase your progress. Maya also played a huge role. She checked in regularly, sometimes dragging him out for a walk along the Puget Sound. "Fresh air, Danny," she'd say, handing him coffee. Those small outings reminded him the world was still out there, waiting for him. Daniel's mother eventually learned the truth. One evening, he broke down on the phone and confessed everything. Caroline was quiet for a long time, then said, "Sweetheart, I wish you had told me sooner. I love you no matter what. We'll get through this together." Her words felt like a warm blanket. Encouraged by therapy, Daniel finally visited his primary care doctor, who confirmed the depression diagnosis and discussed treatment options. They decided on a combination of continued therapy and a low-dose antidepressant. Daniel was nervous about medication, but Dr. Martinez reassured him, "It's just one more tool to help you heal." The first few weeks on medication weren't easy. He felt groggy and restless, but slowly the fog began to lift. He noticed small victories, brushing his teeth every morning, eating balanced meals, and even replying to a coworker's text. One Saturday, he dusted off his guitar. His fingers stumbled over the strings at first, but soon, familiar melodies filled the room. For the first time in months, Daniel smiled without forcing it. At work, his performance improved. He still struggled with focus, but when deadlines loomed, he reminded himself to take breaks instead of spiraling into panic. His boss noticed the change and told him, "I'm glad to see you back on track." Those words gave him a sense of worth again. Daniel began attending a support group for young adults dealing with depression. At first, he sat quietly, listening to others share their battles. But one evening, he raised his hand and said, "I thought I was the only one feeling like this." Heads nodded around the circle. He realized he wasn't alone. The group became a safe space. He made friends with Jordan, a college student, and Elena, a single mom. They exchanged numbers and checked in on each other between meetings. Knowing people understood made Daniel feel less like a burden. Of course, not everyone reacted kindly. When Daniel confided in an old friend about therapy, the friend scoffed, "Man, just toughen up. Everyone's stressed." The comment stung, but Daniel reminded himself of Dr. Martinez's words, "Your struggle is real. Not everyone will understand, and that's okay." By summer, Daniel noticed changes in himself. He laughed more, even if softly. He reconnected with a few friends and joined them at a Mariners baseball game. The roar of the crowd, the smell of popcorn, the warmth of companionship, it all reminded him that life still had joys to offer. But setbacks still came. One night, after a stressful week, he spiraled into self-doubt. He lay awake, fighting old thoughts of worthlessness. Instead of giving in, he reached for his journal and wrote, "This is just a bad night. Tomorrow will be different." It was a small act of defiance against his depression. In therapy, Dr. Martinez praised his progress. "Recovery isn't about never struggling again," she said. "It's about building tools to handle the struggles when they come." Daniel nodded, realizing that resilience, not perfection, was the goal. He began volunteering at a local community center, teaching basic coding to teenagers. The first day, he was nervous, but when one student proudly showed him a working program, Daniel felt a spark of purpose. Helping others reminded him that he had value to give. His relationship with his mother also deepened. Caroline visited Seattle one weekend, and they walked through Pike Place Market together. She hugged him tightly and whispered, "I'm proud of you, Daniel." He blinked back tears, knowing how far he had come. Maya, too, continued to be his anchor. One evening, they sat on the rooftop of his apartment, watching the sunset paint the sky pink and orange. "I'm glad you're still here," she said softly. Daniel swallowed hard and replied, "Me too." By autumn, Daniel could see how different his life looked compared to the year before. He wasn't cured, but he was coping. He had tools, support, and most importantly, hope. The weight hadn't vanished, but he no longer carried it alone. One particularly powerful moment came during group therapy. A new member, trembling with fear, admitted she was thinking about ending her life. Daniel leaned forward and said, "I know what that feels like. I've been there, but it can get better. You're not broken." His words carried the weight of lived truth. The young woman nodded through tears. Later, the group leader thanked Daniel for speaking up. Walking home that night, he realized he had gone from barely surviving to helping others find hope. That realization filled him with quiet pride. At work, Daniel advocated for mental health awareness. He suggested starting an employee wellness program and even shared his experience in a staff meeting. His voice shook, but when he finished, colleagues clapped. Some later confided they were struggling too. Daniel knew not every day would be easy. There would always be ups and downs. But now he had a support system. Therapy, medication, friends, family, and new coping strategies. He no longer felt powerless against his mind. Seattle's rainy days still came, but instead of feeling suffocated, Daniel used them as reminders that storms always pass. On clear days, he took long walks by Lake Union, letting the sunlight warm his skin. Dr. Martinez eventually suggested reducing therapy sessions to every other week. "You're building independence," she said. Daniel felt nervous, but also proud. He was standing on steadier ground. One evening, he opened his old journal to the first page, filled with hopeless scribbles. Then he flipped to his recent entries, filled with gratitude lists, reflections, and small victories. The contrast was staggering. He wrote, "I thought I was drowning, but I've learned to swim. I thought I was alone, but I've found people who care. I thought I had no future, but now I see possibilities." With that strength, Daniel set new goals, maybe pursuing a leadership role at work, maybe traveling, maybe even mentoring others who struggled with mental health. His world, once so small, now stretched wide again. At Thanksgiving, sitting at the table with his mother and a few friends, Daniel felt a surge of gratitude. He raised his glass and said, "This year I'm thankful for second chances." Everyone smiled, understanding more than he could put into words. Later that night, Daniel stepped outside, gazing up at the Seattle skyline. He thought about the alley where he once cried, convinced no one cared. Now he knew differently. He cared for himself, and others cared too. The journey wasn't perfect, but it was real. He had fallen, but he had gotten back up, and that mattered more than never falling at all. Daniel often reminded himself, "Depression is part of my story, but it doesn't define me." Saying those words gave him power. He wasn't just surviving, he was living. He also learned to talk openly about mental health without shame. At family gatherings, he'd gently correct misconceptions. "It's not about weakness," he'd explain. "It's about health, just like diabetes or asthma. His openness inspired others. Maya once told him, "Danny, you don't realize it, but you're giving people permission to speak their truth." That comment stayed with him, reminding him that his pain had found purpose. As another year closed, Daniel stood by the waterfront, watching the Space Needle shine against the night sky. He whispered to himself, "I made it." And in that moment, he knew that healing wasn't about erasing the past, but about building a future strong enough to carry it. As weeks passed, Daniel began to notice small but important changes. He wasn't cured overnight, but he felt himself breathing easier. The crushing weight that once made getting out of bed unbearable was slowly lifting. He could smile at strangers again, and sometimes even laughed at jokes Maya cracked over coffee. These moments reminded him that healing was possible. One Sunday, Daniel joined a local support group at a community center in Capitol Hill. Sitting in a circle of strangers who spoke about anxiety, depression, and survival, he realized he wasn't the only one battling silent wars. Hearing their stories made him feel less broken. For the first time, he spoke openly, saying, "I thought I was alone in this, but being here makes me feel understood." Heads nodded, and a sense of belonging settled in. Caroline, his mother, noticed the difference when he visited her in Tacoma. As they shared dinner, she smiled warmly. "You seem lighter, Danny. I've missed this version of you." Tears stung his eyes, but they were tears of relief. He realized how much he had been holding back, and how much strength it took to finally let someone in. Daniel's journey was far from over. There were still hard days when the shadows lingered. But now he had tools. Breathing exercises from therapy, numbers to call when he felt overwhelmed, and friends who refused to let him slip into silence. Most importantly, he had hope, and that hope guided him forward one step at a time. On another Saturday morning, Daniel stood at Cary Park overlooking the Seattle skyline. The Space Needle rose against the backdrop of Mount Rainier, and the sun broke through the clouds. He whispered to himself, "I made it this far." He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was learning to live again, proof that even in the darkest storms, light can still break through. A few weeks later, Daniel signed up for a volunteer program at a local shelter in Seattle. At first, he worried he wouldn't have the energy, but something shifted when he listened to the stories of people experiencing homelessness. Many spoke about battling addiction, mental illness, and isolation. Serving meals and simply talking with them gave Daniel perspective. He wasn't the only one who had felt invisible. Through volunteering, he met Marcus Green, a former veteran who had struggled with PTSD. Marcus shared how group therapy and community support saved his life. "Man, it's not about fighting this alone," Marcus told him one evening. "It's about finding people who will walk through it with you." Daniel carried those words like a lifeline. At work, Daniel decided to speak with his manager honestly about his struggles. Nervous, he explained, "I've been dealing with depression, but I'm working on it. I may need flexibility some days." To his surprise, his manager responded with compassion, connecting him with the company's employee assistance program. For the first time, Daniel realized that honesty could open doors instead of shutting them. Maya remained a steady presence, cheering on his victories, whether it was making it to a group session, finishing a project at work, or cooking a real meal instead of ordering takeout. One evening, she said, "Danny, I'm proud of you. You've come so far." He smiled faintly, realizing that her friendship had been one of his greatest anchors through the storm. Daniel began journaling at night, writing down not only his fears, but also small moments of gratitude. Some nights, it was as simple as "the rain sounded beautiful today," or "I laughed at a funny movie." Slowly, these notes created a mosaic of hope, reminding him that light existed even on the hardest days. As spring turned to summer, Daniel started hiking again. The first time he set foot on a trail near Mount Rainier, the fresh air filled his lungs, and he felt alive in a way he hadn't in years. Each step up the trail symbolized progress, hard, uneven, but leading somewhere beautiful. He paused at the summit, looking out over the landscape, and whispered, "I'm still here." Daniel's story became more than survival, it became a message. He began sharing his journey at community events and online forums, reminding others that it was okay to seek help, to speak up, to fall, and rise again. Healing isn't linear, he often said, but every small step matters. And in those words, many found the courage to start their own path toward healing. Thanks for watching.